Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45 listeners. I'm sorry, you are coming in partway through a conversation. We've been here chatting and having really meaningful conversations. And I said, we need to start recording because this is really great. So I am thrilled to have Daniela Chase on the podcast today.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Daniela is also a coach, NLP practitioner.
Yes.
Neuro-linguistic programming practitioner is NLP. Is there anything else that I'm missing in that introduction?
Gosh. So I am Master Prac certified coach and NLP coach since 2018.
Okay.
I did my Prac level certification and training in 2017. I'm also, and this is so weird, I am level 3 attuned Reiki practitioner. I know, generally speaking, people, a lot of people out there are calling themselves Reiki masters at that point. I believe mastery is something that is acquired over time. So I don't refer to myself as a Reiki master, but I am a practitioner as well. And I am generally a very curious human being. Curious in the sense that some people I think experience me as being a little bit weird.
And it's my favorite kind.
And also curious as from the perspective of I have an insatiable curiosity around human behavior. What makes us tick? What makes us behave and respond and decide and be in the ways we are doing all of those things.
Yeah. I think we're going to come back to this curiosity question because it underlines a lot of things that I have been thinking about and considering. So welcome. I'm so glad that you are here today. We met just a few weeks ago. Yes. We were at a therapeutic hypnosis session. Happened to sit beside each other. I used happened in the most ironic sense because nothing ever just happens. And you needed a ride home, which I was able to do. And we started having conversations and realized just how much our lives had intersected up until that point. And as we were having conversation, I thought you would be a really brilliant guest to have on this show. So I'm glad that you are here today.
So really need to acknowledge and offer a huge shout out to one of our mutual favorite humans.
Oh, yes.
Jane Dewar. Jane, we love you. If you're watching this, if you're hearing this, just sending you all the love and all the admiration. And want to take a moment to acknowledge that my eldest is the remarkable human being they are today, in large part because you were there to affirm them and create space for them during some very difficult high school years. And I will forever be grateful for that. Thank you.
That's one of the things I think we don't do enough is putting out there though and doing those recognition pieces. And it's one of the things I do try to do on this podcast. So thank you very much for taking the opportunity to do that, because Jane Dewar has had an impact on the lives of so many people in our community. And often all of that impact goes unknown.
Yes, unsung, the unsung hero of Simcoe County and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, Daniela, tell me your story. How did you get to where you are now?
Oh my goodness, we could come at this from so many different angles. I have been on a journey of self-discovery pretty much forever. I was raised in a foster family situation. So my biological aunt and her husband were my foster parents. My maternal grandmother was my legal guardian. The two women I refer to as sisters, they are cousins by blood, but very much sisters in every other way. And there was a lot of dysfunctionality, a lot of abuse in that family of origin space. And so I made the determination very early on that I was going to figure out how to do things differently, I remember at 20, I remember making the declaration that the patterns of trauma and abuse were going to stop with my generation. And I think a lot of us who fall into that age range of late boomer, early Gen Xer, or right on the cusp, a lot of us remember making those declarations.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us look back now and see how we were both successful and unsuccessful at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the conversations we're having now around trauma and generational patterns and cycles of abuse, et cetera, were simply not conversations we were having when we were very young.
Mm-hmm.
And we simply lacked the awareness. We also lacked the supports because the conversations were not being had. That
we didn't even have the vocabulary.
We didn't.
It was
we
like
had
those
no language.
words didn't exist, or they weren't used in the way that we use them now, with the understanding of what they truly mean.
So when I hear conversations or people sharing thoughts on social platforms around how this generation versus that generation, and like I understand all of it. Kids going no contact with parents who really have a lot of learning and growing and evolving to do. And responsibility to take, who are themselves traumatized to the point where they can't own how the cycle of abuse has continued in their family. My mind is everywhere. It's really, I acknowledge and I applaud and I celebrate the younger generations, the Gen Zs, the Gen Alphas, the millennials who are raising kids differently. Gentle parenting, yes, full on. And I think we also need to take a moment to recognize that we cannot take ownership of many of the underlying concepts that form gentle parenting, because I think our indigenous people were doing that kind of parenting a long time ago.
Absolutely.
And I have to, I have to give credit where it's due.
Yes.
You know, a lot of these concepts that filtered through and that more spiritually aware and less religious younger people are bringing to how they create their lives and how they develop their relationships with everyone are very much informed by spiritual concepts that were practiced by Indigenous peoples around the globe and here in Canada on Turtle Island.
Yes.
A long, long time ago. So recognizing that and honoring that and the influences that come through and help us to live better, more wholehearted, more authentic and gentle and compassionate and empathic lives is huge.
It is unwinding the damage of colonization and patriarchy is exceptionally difficult. It's one of the conversations we were having just before we started recording, because it has infiltrated absolutely every element. Even if you think about it through the periodic table, like every element in our system is infiltrated by colonization and patriarchy. And it's not until, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
But because it is so prevalent and persistent in everything, it's what makes it so difficult to see. It also is what makes me think about why the process to reconciliation. I mean, there's 1,000 reasons why it's deeply painful and challenging. But one of them is that we are coming back to what already existed.
Yes.
And was intentionally dismantled, violently dismantled. And now we have to do all of this healing to make space for what already was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's an energetic resonance to that wants to come out my eyes as we speak. Yeah. So it is, there's so much deep healing to happen around that. And I was I was on another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and we were having this intergenerational conversation. And I think it is exceptionally important that generations start talking to each other and recognizing that we can learn from each other. Mm-hmm. My last couple of years in education, and I remember it when I first started. So I'm born in 1977, which is this funky little micro generation. Have you heard about this? Mm-hmm. So we are Xennials. Mm-hmm. So we are a blend of Gen X and millennials, because our early childhood was analog, but we came online early enough that we are still considered digital initiates, mm-hmm. right at the beginning. So when I started teaching, I remember the teacher across the hall saying to me, well, you and I just have very different perspectives on teaching, on education. You work to live, and I live to work. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh, wow, yeah, yes. That is a very, very different perspective. But there wasn't an engagement in conversation around how we might learn from each other. It was a judgment. And in my last couple of years as an educator, I was hearing that same judgment come from people of my generation, who now are the senior elder educators in the system, toward millennials and Gen Zs now who are coming into the system. And the conversation went something along the lines of like, well, how are these kids ever going to exist in the real world? They're saying no to staying after school for hours. They're saying no to giving up their whole lives. They won't take a contract because it interferes with their yoga schedule. And I was like, good. Yeah. Good. We should be learning from each other, because look what we have done to ourselves in the service of patriarchy and colonized patriarchal and colonized notions of work. Mm-hmm. We have destroyed ourselves.
Absolutely.
And if we could open our minds and listen to the generation coming up, because they have watched us destroy ourselves, and they know not to do that.
Yes, very much so. In the same way that I had a front row seat to the dysfunction in my parents' relationship, mm-hmm. my kids had a front row seat to the dysfunction in the relationship I had with their dad. Mm-hmm. And I think it's brave in the same way that I was brave. And then ultimately, for a variety of reasons, ended up perpetuating a very patriarchal dynamic in the home. I'm absolutely in love with Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They embody all the fire that I remember having as a kid, and they are demanding more space to take up, where I wasn't brave enough, And I say that not as a judgment against myself. It's more of an acknowledgement of how far we've come as a society, and how we as Gen Xers and as Xennials contributed to, like, every generation moved us forward. It's been an incremental journey. Like, my mom decided, my mom was raised by a violent, abusive, philandering drunk. And she shared stories of being regularly beaten by her father, regularly physically punished, watching her mother experience the same, watching her siblings experience the same. And her vow was, I will never beat my children. And to her credit, she didn't. She's still a parent. She's still human. We're still kids. She still gets frustrated and angry. Her moving us forward in our family line, she did not beat us, but when she got to beyond the point of her end, her way of releasing that stress and that tension was verbal violence. It was humiliation. It was emotional abuse. And I experienced a fair amount of that, as did my sisters. And Mom loved us. But when she lost it, and it was not a pleasant experience. And words do hurt as much.
I have similar
and they
experience.
linger longer
Yep.
than bruises do. Not to say that someone who's physically abused doesn't also have the lingering emotional impact. Of course they do.
Yes.
So I experienced discipline and punishment in that way. And I made the choice. I made the declaration that I was not going to perpetuate that way of parenting. And as any mother of a toddler who is sleep deprived, who hasn't showered in who knows how many days at this point, who hasn't had the opportunity to sit down and really have a full meal uninterrupted and, be present with themselves. There are moments when our children are very young and we're new moms and we don't really know what we're doing and we just lose our minds.
Absolutely.
And we catch ourselves in those moments and, we berate ourselves for those moments. And I think it's far more effective when we catch ourselves in those moments to recognize, oh, this is the pattern showing up. Hard no. No, I'm not going to do this. Thank God I caught myself.
Yes.
Owning it. And like, I remember losing my temper with my toddler son and coming to awareness as vitriol was falling out of my mouth and immediately dropping down to my knees. I am so sorry. It is never okay for anyone to speak to you in this way. I am so sorry. I lost my cool. It's not okay. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
This was me.
And that is such a powerful...
And it's all on me.
Yeah, and that's such a powerful approach, right? Because the reality is we are humans.
Yeah.
We're going to have our moments.
Yeah.
It just... Our biological makeup, the way our brains work, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But to be able to, and you said it, and I was thinking about this when you were speaking earlier about, and my children witnessed the dysfunction in my relationship. It's that same capacity to own your mistakes and not hide it.
Yeah.
Right. And to show a child that it's okay to apologize because that's how we learn. We make a mistake, we catch it, we reflect, we make amends to whoever we may need to make amends to.
Yeah.
And then we can move forward in a healed and whole way.
Yeah.
And that's what sets us free.
Yes.
Yes.
Patterns, ignoring patterns when they show up, because it's too uncomfortable and I can't allow myself to see me through that lens because it is so painful to know that I have just inflicted on another human, a powerless human, the same kind of harm that was inflicted upon me. There is, I think, a very natural desire to simply deny and avoid that.
Absolutely.
Because who wants to be the bad mom? Nobody.
No.
Nobody.
Nobody.
And yet, as we move into this time and space where we're having conversations around exactly these kinds of behaviors, because it's so important to acknowledge in order to heal. See, me coming forward, knowing that there are still layers of shame that I carry around these behaviors and these very isolated incidents, if I don't speak about it, that shame survives within me. If I don't speak about it, there's another mom out there who's going through the same thing, or another dad out there who's going through similar, and their shame will silence them. And as long as it stays in the closet, as long as it stays hidden, swept under the rug, as long as we refuse to give it the light of day, it continues to be a problem.
Yes.
You know? And I remember having conversations with my kids. I have two. And I think the eldest was somewhere around 14 when I first had this conversation with them. And my younger one was probably a similar age. But I remember saying, there's going to come a day when you're going to realize you're really pissed off at me about something. Who knows what? Oh, Mom, no way. Mom, you're awesome. You're the best. All my friends love you. You're just so great. No, hear me. There will come a day when you will realize that you are really angry with me about something. And I want you to know that when that day comes, you can come to me and you can hold me accountable. You can say the hard things and I will hear you and I will validate your experience. And I say that because I know that as much as I loved my mother, there were some things that she did, some choices that she made that enraged me.
Absolutely.
And as a young person, I didn't have the capacity to understand how trapped by the social structures at the time my mother was.
Yeah.
And on that day, when our kids realize how angry they are with us, what's coming to the fore is not the adult version of themselves, but that younger version that in that moment was enraged. And it's finally catching up and being heard by the adult version of them.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a trend where, this is happening with kids, with young adults, and even older adults who are holding their parents to account as they should, because they love us. They want to see us grow. They're bringing this to us as a gift and an opportunity for us to own it and grow.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because I think that is the most important perspective to look at that from, is that it is a gift and it is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of the traditional structure that we have of, well, just don't ever talk about it.
Yeah.
And I know there's not a person I know who I have a conversation with about their family of origin, about their in-laws, about families going forward, where there is this simmering, underlying, everybody knows, but nobody talks about it. And it gets in the way of true relationship.
Yes.
Because everybody is just trying to maintain stability, maintain their own personal comfort, to not have to own their role in what happened, because you can't have a relationship without everybody having a role in it.
Yeah.
And so it's easier to just let the simmer happen, only it's not.
And both can be true at the same time.
Yes.
I know that both were true at the same time for me, because I was aware of generational patterns. I was aware of generational trauma. I had made a declaration that I was going to put an end to it, and at the same time, there were other factors that, I wasn't going to go here, but I will. Not having been raised by my biological parents, having had the experience of not having my biological father present ever in my life, and having been raised in a home where I was simultaneously most loved by my grandmother and my mom, and most at risk by my dad. Being able to provide my children with a stable nuclear family environment, patterned very much on Leave It to Beaver. Not gonna lie. Not that I consciously set out to do that.
No,
but my concept of what a healthy family looks like was built on Leave It to Beaver, Happy Days, the Cunninghams.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Trying to think. There was a third one I used to. Oh, and the show Family. I used to love the show Family. It was a 1 hour American drama starring Sada Thompson and James Broderick and Christy McNichol and Gary Frank. Loved that show. Meredith Baxter Burney was in it as well. And what I loved about, I mean, the cleavers were just perfect. They were just dusted off, spit shine polished.
Yes.
You know, nothing going on there.
Yeah.
But the Cunninghams and the Family in Family, I'm trying to remember, the Lawrences, they had stuff and things to unpack, but they did everything conversationally. They did everything without violence. And this was the kind of environment that I wanted to co-create.
Yeah.
You know? But I brought so much baggage into that relationship, as yet unpacked, unhealed baggage, that some of the cycles were bound to continue, you know, because it's not as simple as making the decision, because there's so much unconscious programming running.
Oh, yeah.
And this is where the work that I do with coaching, it's the reason I choose to do it, because the tools and techniques of NLP helped me change my life, helped me take ownership of and take responsibility for a number of dynamics that I had contributed to that were not helping, that were not healing, that were harmful. And it gave me a perspective from which to witness my life and be able to say, okay, yeah, that needs healing. You know, that behavior is evidence of an unhealed wound.
Yes. And yeah, and there's overlap in the work that you do with that and the strategies that I use through parts work.
Yeah.
Right. It's there's a lot of significant overlap there. Yeah.
And I want to be clear too, that there is no one holy grail modality.
No.
There is no single holy grail modality. There are so many people exploring healing our woundedness and you know, releasing our trauma that is literally stored in our bodies until we acknowledge it, confront it, process it, and let it go. There are so many people doing this kind of work from so many different angles, and NLP has helped me. And there are elements to my healing that NLP has not touched.
Yeah.
You know, because NLP doesn't so much dive into the somatic parts of the work. So somatic experiencing is so important.
Yes, it is.
So important. And I think finding practitioners who will support you in a variety of different ways, you will know, it will resonate with you when the person is sitting in front of you or standing in front of you. I remember when I started this journey, I walked into a workshop that I had registered for. I was standing at the registration table, and my head was kind of tilted because I was, you know, filling in the forms. My head's tilted, and I see this woman across the room, and right here in my left ear, I hear. Now, bear in mind, no one's standing there.
Yes, no.
I hear, you need to work with her. She's the real deal. Turns out she was the person who was actually delivering the workshop. And 2 weeks later, I walked into, I was in her office and working with her. And that was the beginning of she's the one who initially led me to a weekend workshop down in Vaughan. You know, it's led by this guy from Newmarket. You know, his name's Ernie Pavan, and it was just following the breadcrumbs, you know?
Yeah.
And recognizing that each person we encounter has gifts to share, and this journey is never over.
No. And that's something that has been rolling around a lot because in the coaching world, as being new to it, I find myself sitting in places of discomfort a lot for a variety of different reasons. Coaching work is so essential on so many ways. And the language around it in very traditional senses, I find like really triggering. That like, I can fix you in 3 weeks. Like, one, I don't need fixing.
Yes.
I need healing. And 3 weeks is a heartbeat. And there is no time, there is no timeline. And that's some of the first conversation I have with clients is there isn't a timeline. This is not a destination, because healing happens in a cycle and life continues to happen.
Yeah.
So you can do healing, and then something in life will bring that back to the surface. It doesn't mean that you didn't do the healing work. It just means life continues to happen.
Yeah.
Right? It's one chapter after another.
In NLP speak, our unconscious mind, when it feels safe enough to do so, when it feels that it is safe to do so, it will serve up a memory.
Yes.
It will serve up that memory, often in response to some external event that triggers us, that triggers the memory. And if we choose to, we can look upon that, recognize it as an unhealed wound, and go and find the support we need to heal the thing. Bearing in mind that the unconscious mind will only serve up as much as it feels safe to reveal in that moment. So we can do the work of healing that piece that we've now got awareness of. And 6 months down the road, 6 years down the road, something else may happen. And oh my gosh, I thought I dealt with this, just like you were saying. I thought, and I've had this experience. I thought I dealt with this. Why am I here again? Well, we're here again because wounds run deep. And they need to be healed at every level.
Yes. And that's a really powerful visual to think through. Yeah.
And that initial piece of healing was necessary to create the safety that the unconscious mind needs to serve up the next layer.
Yes. And this is taking me back to the beginning of our conversation when I said, hold that idea of curiosity. We're going to come back to that because it is a theme that has run through my conversations in trying to figure out why some humans stay stuck in the right, wrong, good, bad, binary thinking, and why some humans are able to see beyond the binary in every capacity.
Yes.
That exists. And I believe it is curiosity.
Yes.
That when you operate from a place of curiosity, rather than a question of the place of judgment, like you're coming from a place of wonder, which means you are always open to learning and understanding someone else's perspective.
I agree with you.
And
I would go beyond that. Because what creates the space for the curiosity to exist?
This is where I wonder, right? Yeah. What creates that in someone?
And where I'm at is I didn't have the space to be curious about the motivations, the triggers, the unconscious patterns for as long as I was still running this, not just running because the narrative runs, but believing the narrative that because this is in me, that makes me a horrible human. You know, it wasn't until I stumbled upon individuals who were able to share with me from a place of absolute congruence that every human being is inherently valuable, inherently precious, inherently magnificent, and that there is no end to the ways in which we experience ourselves and express ourselves in the world. There is no end. And what an amazing thing that is.
Yes.
Because that is where the richness and the beauty of this tapestry we call life comes from.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
This idea that some kind of homogeneity is to be desired.
Yeah.
No. Thank you.
The notion of sameness is I struggle with that so much. Like, even, and I know people, when they say this, they are coming from a loving perspective. But when we're talking about race and different colored skin and ethnicity, and people say, what, but we're all the same on the inside.
But it's not sameness they're looking for.
No.
It's safeness.
Yeah, okay.
This is where I feel safe. And different is something new, and it's something I don't understand. And when I don't understand it, I feel threatened. And when I feel threatened, I'm going to come back at you in a variety of different manners, or I'm going to run away.
Mm-hmm.
One or the other.
That's thank you.
So it's safeness, and back to, what is it that allowed me to develop curiosity in my own journey and really start to look at myself and own where I had been perpetuating patterns and behaviors that were problematic. It came from a place of accepting the wholeness of my humanity.
Yes.
And being able to acknowledge that not only am I never going to be perfect, I'm not meant to be. I'm not meant to be. I'm meant to be dynamic, and I'm meant to be continually evolving, and I'm meant to constantly grow and change. And as such, I'm freed from this need to invest myself in any one position or belief or thought. Because all those are just another possibility. And if it's a possibility that is uplifting and it contributes in positive ways, fantastic. If it is, however, potentially harmful to myself or anyone else, then that needs to be examined and healed.
Yeah.
So learning to love myself, really.
Yes.
All of myself. And when I can love all of myself, even the bits that I don't, I'm uncomfortable looking at, then I can get curious. It's like, okay, that thing there that's, ooh, if I touch it, it hurts, If I poke at it, it's really uncomfortable. From that space of, I can notice that it's uncomfortable. I can notice, but I don't have to judge myself for it. I can just acknowledge that this is there. It is what it is. And it doesn't have to stay that way.
Yes. And
what supports do I need to move myself through this? And sometimes I can do that work on my own because, I've been very intensely focused since 2017 on acquiring skills and practices that help me do that. Sometimes with all the tools and techniques and skills and abilities that I have, I still need support. We will never achieve this in a vacuum.
No.
We need each other to move through this because sometimes that thing that I know I need to poke and prod is so uncomfortable. I need someone else sitting there not judging me for it so that I can learn how not to judge myself on that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of individualism, again, it sort of takes us back to the beginning of our conversation where we're unwinding, right? Because individualism is a new concept, right? That's colonialism, patriarchy, and capitalism. Is the idea that we have to do everything ourselves. And if you're doing it, if you need someone else to help you, it's cheating. It doesn't count. When the truth is, we are community beings. We are meant to be in community with each other.
Yeah.
Right. It was the power of, we were talking earlier about the coven that I have. I am grateful that I have a couple covens that I get to be part of. And I use the word coven really specifically because those were places of great power to communities for women, right? They shared their power together and they were stronger because of the way that they supported each other in that community.
Yes.
And that is why they were targeted, destroyed, and a narrative was created around them being evil, dangerous.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we're seeing that same narrative coming forward again.
Indeed.
As women are once again convening. Right?
Yes.
And we're seeing most overtly right now, we're seeing it being targeted against the LGBTQ, in particular the trans, queer, non-binary community.
Yeah.
And it's a hateful rhetoric that, I mean, I'm right up there. I'm the mom of a trans, queer, non-binary person. And I am right there when it comes to having that sense of outrage. I want to fight for my kid, for everyone else who has a kid, who, for all of, I just want people to be able to exist in peace.
Yes.
And have every person be able to explore the full potential of who they are and how they can experience themselves and how they can express themselves. Because that is where the richness that contributes to my life comes from.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
All of those amazing differences are mirrors for that show me that I can continue to explore and safely be who I am and continue to expand that. Why on earth would I fight against anyone who's different? And we were talking about this earlier. Where do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
And the line for me, the litmus test is, if I'm seeing a behavior that I'm unfamiliar with, if I'm seeing an expression of humanity that I'm unfamiliar with and that I'm uncomfortable with, or that I find offensive, and offensive is always an indicator there's a trauma in me, there's an unhealed thing in me that really needs my attention. But anything that is outside of myself, that is different, that I don't comprehend, not that I need to, I'm a big believer in the baseline is respect.
Yes.
Comprehension and understanding aren't entirely necessary, but respect and appreciation, yes. The litmus test is that, or could it potentially be no? Could it potentially be no? Because that's catastrophic thinking. That hasn't even happened yet. Is it currently, right now, in this moment, causing overt harm to another human being or to that individual themselves?
Yes.
When it comes to that individual themselves, that's not a judgment I can make. So that part of the question is off the table. Right?
Yes.
When it comes to, is that behavior or that position or that expression causing direct harm to another human being, that's where I have a boundary.
Yes.
But if I'm personally offended, that's not a them problem. That's a me problem. That's where I got some work to do. You know?
Yeah, there's two things that are coming up. So one is going back to that concept of being, when you are in love with yourself, then you don't see anyone else as a threat.
Yes.
Right? So when you are fully over the moon in love with yourself, and again, that doesn't mean that you don't have things that are painful and things that poke up, but you are inherently connected to your own worth, then I don't need someone to be what I think they should be. Because if I love myself this much and they love themselves that much, then we are free.
Yes.
Yes. And that is the foundation of all of the work that needs to be done. And we were having this conversation before because I had had a situation where some people who I care about very much in my life were posting a contrary opinion to me about drag story time. And I had the conversation with some of my friends who are in the community because I wanted to be able to model that it is entirely possible to have a conversation, because we, the grand we, have lost the capacity to give and take, to exchange ideas. And that is where we are seeing the breakdown in democracy.
The conversations have very much become hyper politicized.
Yes.
Everything is a power grab, and there's little to no space being afforded to approaching any of these issues that are social issues from the perspective of the wholeness and the healing of humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and I'm very concerned with and interested in wholeness, healing, and humanity.
Yes.
And I'm also very aware of the politicization of these conversations, because, going to be real, the people who hold the power are feeling threatened right now, because if we do manage to continue to move forward, and I have no doubt that we will, Gen Alpha, Gen Z, go you. The conversations that we're having around wholeness, healing, and humanity are deconstructing the very structures that uphold the power that is in the hands of a very few. And the very few are pushing back in every way they know how.
In the most violent ways. Yes. Which creates those ripples of fear, which feed into the cycle of not being able to have conversation. Right? Because people are in activated states, prefrontal cortex, amygdala are offline. And so then we are operating from a space of fear and protection. So that's, and my identity is wrapped up in that now. And so everything around me needs to be affirming of this identity that I've created around myself that makes me feel safe, because fear is uncomfortable.
And it comes back to, in this conversation, it comes back to this binary, this idea that everything is either black or white, or right or wrong. And in my own journey, I was very much addicted for the longest time to a need for validation. And bear with me here, because this thought is literally formulating as it falls out of my mouth. My childhood experiences, I'm going to give you one example. Okay. Raised in a fostered situation. My mom loved and adored and treated me in the same way that she treated her girls. We were all her girls, you know, all three of us. My dad, imagine, you know, European family, all the unwrapping of presents happens Christmas Eve. And my dad would kind of be on the fringe of that, never really participating in that. You know, everything under the tree was manifested by my mom and my grandmother. At the end of the evening, because he needed the spotlight, my dad would ceremonially get up from wherever he was sitting observing all of this unfolding, and he would walk into his bedroom, and he would come back out with 3 envelopes. And he would present these envelopes to my sisters and myself. And their envelopes always contained the same amount. And my envelope contained exactly half of what they got. So I had an annual reminder that my value was half. So being the, like, growing into the fiery kid that I was, the very obviously angry kid that I was, there was something in me that took shape that was, I will not be wronged anymore. Right?
Yeah.
And the refusal to be wronged or invalidated by others was only a reflection. It was a reflection of this very damaging voice in my own head that continually tried to tell me that I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I had an addiction to being wrong, to making myself wrong. And I created all kinds of chaos and drama in my life
Mm-hmm.
out of this need to find my own validation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wasn't finding it within myself. It really did not matter what anyone else was doing or saying or how they were treating me. I was struggling to find my own inner validation.
Yeah.
And getting in my own way doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I think when it comes to this idea of people being incredibly aggressive because their own internal dialogue says, I am not safe because of this external condition that I see unfolding, or this human expressing in the way that they do. I think that's layered in with the right wrong, because if I give this much space to that expression of humanity, that means that everything that I've held, everything that I've believed, everything that I have taken on and accepted is at risk. And maybe I'm wrong.
Yes.
And none of us want to be wrong. And here's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
In giving ourselves permission to consider the possibility that some of the thoughts we've been holding on to, some of the beliefs we've been holding on to, are not serving us. They are, in fact, not contributing to our well-being or anyone else's. That's where the freedom lies.
Yes.
Be willing to be wrong. Be willing to consider that other possibilities exist.
Yes.
And be willing and curious and explore and find what works for you, and be okay with whatever works for you in the now moment. It's going to have a shelf life.
Yes.
And we will continue to grow. And like, I've done interviews and things before, and I was sharing this with you earlier. There are some things I said in early interviews that I no longer am aligned with.
Yes.
And that's a good thing.
It is a good thing. And that's the beauty of growth, right? That when you give yourself the freedom to be wrong, you give yourself the freedom to grow.
Yes.
Yes. And to listen, to really deeply listen.
Yes.
And I think that is another skill that we've lost, the ability to really listen to what someone else is saying.
And I believe that words and languaging are critically important.
Yes.
So I want to be super clear. Giving myself permission to be wrong is probably a misstatement. It's giving myself permission to acknowledge that the thought that I've held can be wrong without me being wrong. I am an amazing human being who is on this incredible quest, this hero's journey. Right? Thank you, Joseph Campbell. And the holy grail that I am in search of is my truest self.
Yes. Yeah.
You know? Absolutely. And that really has nothing to do with anybody outside of me, because they're all doing exactly the same thing in their way.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And giving one another permission to be on that quest, to fulfill that quest, starts with giving ourselves permission. And if we're afraid of growth, we're going to be afraid of the people who are growing.
Yes. Deeply afraid.
Deeply.
Yes.
Cripplingly so.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like we could talk forever.
I know we could.
I also feel like this is a really good place to wrap up the conversation, because I think I feel like there is some healing in this conversation around there are ways to come back to each other. Yeah. It's not impossible. It just is going to take curiosity, love, internal worth and value, and all of the truth that we need to let ourselves express and receive.
Yes. Yeah. And if you're not yet in a place where you can love something about yourself or someone else, then look for the space where you can be, where you can be present with empathy and kindness and compassion. and a willingness to concede that maybe there's something to what they're saying that you do not yet see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what a beautiful frame for being able to look at something.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you.